Solitude is not inherently harmful. In fact, time spent alone can be restorative, calming, and even necessary for mental health. Quiet moments give the brain space to recover from constant stimulation, regulate stress, and consolidate thoughts. Chosen solitude can sharpen focus and creativity. But isolation becomes something very different when it is not voluntary, when it arrives gradually without being noticed, or when it is imposed by force. At that point, the absence of social contact stops being a break and starts becoming a threat. Human brains evolved in constant interaction with other people. When those interactions disappear for extended periods, the effects reach far deeper than boredom or loneliness. They alter how the brain regulates stress, interprets reality, and maintains a stable sense of self. The longer isolation persists, the more severe and entrenched these effects tend to become. When a person is confined to a limited space for long stretches of time, with little stimulation and no meaningful tasks, their body and brain begin to change in predictable ways. Early on, stress hormones like cortisol rise as the brain detects something is wrong. The nervous system enters a state of alertness, as if preparing for danger. In the short term, this stress response can sharpen attention, but when it becomes chronic, it starts to damage the systems meant to protect us. Social interaction and purposeful activity play a crucial role in emotional regulation because they provide feedback. Other people reflect our thoughts, challenge our assumptions, and anchor us to shared reality. Psychologists sometimes describe this function as social reality testing. Through conversation, facial expressions, and shared experiences, we constantly check whether our perceptions make sense. When that feedback disappears, the mind turns inward with no external correction. Thoughts loop unchecked, emotions amplify, impulses gain strength. Over time, this can erode a person's sense of identity and distort their perception of reality. Depression, obsessive thinking, intrusive thoughts, and suicidal ideation become more likely. In more extreme cases, people begin to experience paranoia, delusions, or hallucinations. These are not signs of personal weakness. They are predictable consequences of a brain deprived of the social input it expects. Prolonged isolation also reshapes the brain's internal balance. The limbic system, which processes fear, threat, and emotional responses, becomes increasingly reactive. The brain is effectively stuck in survival mode, scanning for danger even when none exists. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which supports reasoning, impulse control, planning, and moral judgment, shows reduced activity, and in some studies, measurable shrinkage. This shift makes it harder to think clearly, regulate emotions, or hold complex ideas in mind. Emotional reactions begin to overpower rational thought. Small frustrations trigger outsized responses. Anxiety becomes constant. Anger flares unpredictably. Over time, these patterns become ingrained, making it difficult to return to emotional balance even when isolation ends. The effects are not limited to mental health. Isolation disrupts the body's basic rhythms. Many people lose a reliable sense of time, as days blur together without social cues or scheduled interactions. Sleep cycles often break down, leading to insomnia or irregular rest. Physical symptoms become more common. Heart palpitations, headaches, dizziness, and heightened sensitivity to sound or light. Chronic stress interferes with digestion and appetite, leading to weight loss or gastrointestinal problems. The immune system can weaken, leaving the body more vulnerable to illness. People often attempt to cope by creating strict routines, exercising intensely, reading or writing to maintain mental engagement. These strategies can help to a degree, but they rarely compensate fully for the absence of human contact. This is why many international organizations, medical associations, and human rights groups classify prolonged forced isolation as a form of psychological torture. Despite this, it remains a common practice in many prison systems. Solitary confinement, also referred to as restrictive housing, involves confining individuals to small cells for the majority of the day, often with minimal sensory stimulation and little to no social interaction. In the United States, its use has been especially widespread. In recent years, well over 100,000 incarcerated people have been held in conditions where they spend nearly all day alone in cramped, often windowless spaces. The original intent behind solitary confinement was not punishment for its own sake. In the late 18th century, reform-minded groups promoted isolation as a humane alternative to physical punishment, believing that quiet reflection would encourage moral improvement. The very word penitentiary reflects this idea of enforced reflection leading to penitence. However, the reality quickly contradicted the theory. Critics observed severe psychological deterioration among those subjected to prolonged isolation. Writers, doctors, and judges condemned the practice. One prominent novelist described it as a punishment more devastating than physical torture, because it attacked the mind itself. For a time, its use declined. But in the late 20th century, shifts in criminal justice policy emphasized punishment and control over rehabilitation. Prison populations expanded rapidly. Overcrowding increased tension, violence and unrest within facilities. Solitary confinement became a tool for managing behavior and maintaining order. It was increasingly applied not only for serious offenses, but also for minor rule violations, sometimes as simple as verbal defiance. The harm of isolation does not affect everyone equally. Many people placed in solitary confinement already struggle with mental illness, trauma, or neurological conditions. Isolation intensifies these vulnerabilities. Rather than stabilizing behavior, it often accelerates psychological breakdown. The damage does not always end when isolation ends. Studies show that individuals who have experienced solitary confinement are significantly more likely to exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. They frequently report lasting changes in personality, persistent anxiety, heightened suspicion of others, difficulty concentrating, and an impaired ability to form or maintain relationships. Reintegration into social environments becomes overwhelming rather than relieving. In response to mounting evidence, some jurisdictions have restricted the use of solitary confinement, particularly for people with serious mental illness, young individuals, or pregnant women. Time limits have been introduced in certain places, capping isolation at a few weeks. However, enforcement is inconsistent, and loopholes allow extended isolation under different classifications. The underlying issue remains unresolved. Solitary confinement causes profound harm while failing to achieve its stated goals. It does not reliably reduce violence, deter future crime, or support rehabilitation. In contrast, other countries have taken different approaches. Some prison systems emphasize normalization, education, and social integration, even during incarceration. Facilities are designed to resemble ordinary living environments rather than sensory deprivation units. In these systems, incarcerated individuals participate in work, education, and structured social interaction. One often cited example is Norway, which imprisons fewer people per capita while investing far more resources per individual in housing, training, and reintegration programs. The result is not leniency, but lower rates of reoffending after release. This suggests a broader lesson that extends beyond prisons. Human beings are not built to function in isolation. Social connection is not a luxury layered on top of survival. It is a core biological need. The brain depends on interaction to regulate emotion, maintain reality, and preserve identity. When social contact disappears, the mind does not simply pause. It reorganizes itself around threat, stress, and internal noise. Whether isolation occurs in a cell, through extreme loneliness, or via prolonged social withdrawal, the mechanisms are similar. Over time, isolation erodes the very capacities needed to reconnect. The evidence consistently points to the same conclusion. People do better when they are connected to others. Healing, stability, and growth emerge from interaction, not separation. We are shaped by the minds around us, and without them, the brain struggles to remain whole.